You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow, and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
When Sarah moved into the beautiful luxury apartments at 123 on the Park in Brooklyn, it felt like a dream come true. But that dream quickly spiraled into a chilling nightmare. Behind its renovated walls lies a dark history, dating back to when the building was Caledonian Hospital, treating thousands during some of New York City's deadliest epidemics. Soon after settling in, Sarah began experiencing strange noises, flickering lights, and an unsettling feeling of being watched, especially late at night. Determined to uncover the truth behind these eerie disturbances, she ventured deeper into the building's hidden past, only to realize some histories are better left buried. If you think old buildings can't hold on to memories, or worse, spirits, think again. The halls of 123 on the Park whisper secrets that the living were never meant to hear. If you love true-style supernatural stories, eerie historical mysteries, and experiences so immersive you'll feel like you're living the nightmare yourself, hit subscribe to Soul Studios right now, because the next story we tell might just make you question everything you thought you knew about reality.
I remember the first time I saw 123 on the Park, the luxury apartment building that used to be Caledonian Hospital. Its modern facade of glass and brick gleamed over Prospect Park, giving no hint of the nightmares trapped within. I moved in on a warm spring day, unaware that I was stepping into a place with a century of trauma embedded in its walls. If I had known the building's history, opened in 1910 as a hospital and closed in 2003 after nearly a century of service, maybe I would have thought twice. Locals once affectionately nicknamed it Cali, not realising how many restless spirits might call Cali home. I held my breath in the basement darkness, pressing myself flat against the cold concrete wall. The only light came from my phone's dying flashlight, quivering in my hand. Somewhere in the pitch black, I heard it, the squeak of an old gurney wheel echoing down the corridor. It was slow, deliberate, like someone was pushing it inch by inch. My heart thundered in my chest. I dared not move. Each scrape of metal against the floor was accompanied by a wet dragging sound, as if something heavy was being pulled along with the gurney. A nauseating smell hit me, a mix of antiseptic and decay, like a long-shuttered hospital ward unsealed after decades. I cupped a hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. In the dim beam of my flashlight, I caught a glimpse of something at the far end of the corridor, a shadowy figure in what looked like a tattered white gown. It stood impossibly still next to the silhouette of a gurney. My mind raced. Was this a person? A reflection? No, this can't be real, I thought. But the figure moved, a jolt-like twitch, and began to glide toward me. I wanted to scream, but terror had locked my throat. As the squeaking wheel grew louder, I flattened myself into a doorway, praying the darkness would swallow me. The air turned frigid. My breath misted in front of me in thin white puffs. I could now make out the gurney in detail, an antiquated stretcher with rusted metal rails. Upon it lay a lumpen form covered by a stained sheet. A rancid, sweet smell wafted from it, the unmistakable odour of death long past. The figure in the gown was pushing the gurney, its head bent at an unnatural angle. Every hair on my body rose in primal fear. When the lights flickered overhead, I saw it clearly for one soul-searing second. The figure was a woman in a nurse's uniform, or what remained of one. Her face was ashen, eyes sunken and black. Around her neck hung a crucifix that reflected the light, and her hands were gripping the gurney, thin and mottled with dark blotches as if bruised by life or death. In that blink of light, she snapped her head up toward me. Though her eyes were just inky voids, I felt her stare lock onto mine. My body went ice cold. She knew I was there. The corridor plunged back into darkness as the light died again. I could only hear the wheel, closer now, and the ragged breathing that was not my own. It rasped and rattled, like lungs desperately gasping for air. I clamped a hand over my mouth, trying to silence my own panicked breaths. In the back of my mind, a fact I'd read rang out. During the 1918 flu pandemic, patients' lungs filled so quickly that they would turn blue-black as they suffocated. The sound I heard was exactly how I imagined those doomed patients breathing, a wet, hopeless rattle. Was I hearing an echo from the past, a last breath trapped in these halls? My stomach clenched. I pressed harder into the doorway, inching back, but my shoulder knocked a loose piece of metal, producing a sharp clang. The breathing stopped. The wheel stopped. Silence. My heart pounded in my ears as I realized the figure had halted, listening. A low whisper drifted out of the dark. "Who's there?" It was a woman's voice, warped by a century of solitude. I bit down on my hand to keep from crying out. Suddenly, the lights blazed on, all of them, down the length of the corridor in sequence, illuminating the entire basement hallway in a harsh fluorescent glare. My relief was instant but short-lived. Nothing was there. The corridor was empty. No nurse, no gurney, just scuffed walls and the flicker of lights that shouldn't have power. I didn't wait to question the miracle of the lights. I ran. I sprinted down the corridor toward the exit stairwell, not daring to look back. As I bolted up the stairs, I swore I still heard the faint squeak of that wheel behind me, chasing me up. The lights in the stairwell began shutting off one by one, from the bottom up, as if something invisible was ascending right on my heels. I slammed through the heavy door to the lobby, my lungs burning, and for a split second I thought I smelled a whiff of flowers. Lilies, like the kind you'd find at a funeral. Then the door closed behind me and the scent vanished. Panting and shaking in the empty lobby, I realized I was clutching something in my fist. Slowly, I opened my hand. In my palm was a small round button, an antique metal pin, rusted and green with age. Stamped on it were the words, "Property of Caledonian Hospital." I let it fall to the floor as if it had burned me. This was how my time at 123 on the park ended. But to understand how I got here, you have to know how it all began. Rewind a few months. I was just Sarah, a young graphic designer excited to move into my first solo apartment. 123 on the park had everything I thought I wanted. A doorman, a rooftop terrace, a view of Prospect Park, and a short subway ride to Manhattan. The day I moved in, the lobby was bright and smelled of fresh paint and new carpet. If there were ghosts lurking, they hid behind the gleam of modern renovations. I remember riding up the elevator with my boxes, noticing how spacious it was, large enough to hold a gurney. I joked to the superintendent helping me, who responded with a strange half-smile. In hindsight, that detail makes my skin crawl. Of course, the elevator was so big. This building had been a hospital designed to ferry patients on stretchers between life and death. At first, I only knew broad strokes of the history. Caledonian Hospital opened in 1910 and served Brooklyn for almost 100 years. During that time, it saw innumerable lives begin and end. Babies were born here, accidents and tragedies were rushed here. Cayley, as old-timers called it, even patched up famous locals. I learned that a Brooklyn Dodgers legend, Pee Wee Reese, was treated here in 1940 after injuring himself at Ebbets Field. And in 1982, a zookeeper from the nearby Prospect Park Zoo came in with wounds from a lion attack. Those were the proud, public stories. But what stuck with me more were the quieter ones, whispered by my neighbours once I moved in. This hospital saw the worst of the Spanish flu. They filled every bed and then lined the hallways with the dying, an elderly woman on the 6th floor told me grimly. Bodies piled up in the morgue and beyond until there was nowhere left to put them. I later fact-checked some of her claims, and the truth was even more horrific. In the fall of 1918, the Spanish influenza pandemic devastated New York. The city ultimately buried 33,000 victims of that flu. Hospitals overflowed and the undertakers couldn't keep up. Many bodies lay where they died for days. Brooklyn was especially hard hit, with emergency morgues set up and still unable to handle the volume of the dead. My building, back then, would have been ground zero for that kind of mass casualty event. I imagined the 7th floor, where I slept, crowded with rows of wheezing patients in 1918, nurses in starched white uniforms moving among them with gauze masks on, eyes wide above their makeshift respirators. Perhaps on some freezing night in October 1918, a young nurse had stood in what is now my bedroom, holding the hand of a patient as he turned blue for lack of oxygen, watching helplessly as he drew his last breath. With that kind of history, was it any wonder something lingered here? And it wasn't just the Spanish flu. Tuberculosis, the White Plague, was rampant in the early 20th century, claiming 10,000 New Yorkers in 1910 alone. Back then, treatment was limited. Fresh air and sunlight were about the best doctors could offer. I learned that many hospitals of that era, possibly including Caledonian, wheeled patients up to open-air rooftops or solariums, trying to arrest the disease's progress with a breeze and a prayer. I couldn't help but think of the large roof deck now used for yoga classes and barbecues. Once, maybe it was a place where coughing consumptives huddled under blankets, gazing at the same stars, hoping to live to see another. Sometimes I'd stand on that roof alone at night, the wind unusually cold, and swear I heard a faint echo of a cough or a low moan carried on the breeze. An archival image of Caledonian Hospital in its heyday shows the same brick structure that is now my apartment building. In the early 1900s, patients and nurses walked those halls that are now lined with luxury apartments. I often stared at that old photograph, noting the windows of what is now my unit, and wondered how many people looked out of that same window over the years, and how many never left the building alive. The hospital was a neighbourhood fixture, a place of both hope and despair. Under its roof, life began and life ended with equal frequency, saturating the very foundation with powerful emotions. Despite these heavy thoughts, I was determined to make a happy home there. The first few weeks in 123 on the Park were mostly normal. I arranged my furniture, hung my pictures, and met a few neighbours, young professionals like me, and a couple of older residents who had lived in the area forever. The management had worked hard to banish the building's hospital feel. My apartment was sleek, with shiny hardwood floors and granite counters that tried to hide the institutional bones. But subtle things betrayed the past. The oddly wide doorways to accommodate hospital beds, the long hallways that curved slightly because they once connected different wards, and a strange medicinal clean scent that no amount of air freshener could completely mask. Sometimes, especially on quiet afternoons, the place felt less like a home and more like I was wandering through an empty hospital after visiting hours, that unsettling sterility with something sour beneath it. My first hint that something was off came late one night. I was unpacking a final box in my bedroom when I heard a sound from the hallway just outside my door. Tap, tap, tap. It sounded like someone gently rapping on my door, slow and patient. It was well past midnight. I froze, mid-unpacking, hands suspended in the air. Tap, tap, tap. The third knock, if it was a knock, was more insistent. I quietly crept to the door and peered through the peephole. The hallway light was dim. Our building was trying out motion sensor lights to save energy, which often left sections dark until you stepped out. In the grainy peephole glass, I saw nothing. The corridor was empty in both directions. I held my breath, listening. Just when I was about to exhale and shrug it off, the motion light at the far end of the hall flickered on. Then, the next one, closer to my door, blinked to life as if something invisible was walking towards me, triggering each sensor in turn. I backed away from the peephole, heart thudding. Light after light clicked on down the hall, approaching my door, and then went dark again, one by one in reverse, as if whatever had come had decided to retreat. I didn't sleep much that night. I told myself it was a glitchy sensor or a neighbour's cat escaping or anything logical. But I think deep down that was the first time I felt it, a presence that didn't show itself but let me know I was not alone. In the days that followed, I began noticing small oddities around the building. In the laundry room one floor below me, I came to switch my clothes to the dryer and found all of them already neatly laid on top of the machine. Nice of someone, perhaps. except a couple of pieces were hanging wet on the hooked IV pole that stood in the corner. That pole was a leftover from the hospital days, a tall metal stand with wheels that the developers thought would be kitschy decor for the laundry area. I had chuckled at it when I first saw it, an IV stand among the washers, but now my damp shirts were draped on it carefully as if an attentive nurse had hung them to dry. I was alone in the laundry room. I swallowed, quickly grabbed my half-wet clothes and left, deciding to use a laundromat next time. One morning, around 3 a.m, I was jolted awake by the sound of distant crying. I sat up in bed, my heart plummeting. The sound was unmistakable. It was a child, sobbing somewhere in the building. Faint, muffled by walls, but I could hear the anguish in it. I listened for a few seconds, trying to determine where it came from. Above? Next door? The vents? As I debated getting up, the cries slowly faded. The silence that followed was even more unsettling, like the child had been abruptly silenced. The next day, I asked the doorman if any families lived on my floor. He shook his head. No children in that section of the building. In fact, only a couple of apartments were occupied on that floor aside from mine. I must have seen the worry in my eyes because he offered a faint smile. You know, this building, it takes getting used to. You hear all kinds of noises. Then, almost to himself, I heard him mutter, especially where the paediatrics ward was. My blood went cold. Paediatrics ward? Children did once live and die on my floor long ago. I imagined for a moment a little boy in 1920, scared and feverish, crying for his mother in a room that was now my kitchen. The thought made me feel profoundly sad and scared. Not all the odd incidents were auditory. Some were downright tactile. One day I stepped into the shiny new fitness centre, a selling point of the building, intent on using the treadmill. The gym was empty at midday. As I set my water down, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I had that sensation you get when you're being watched. I glanced at the mirror wall behind the treadmills and nearly jumped out of my skin. There was someone else in the reflection, standing just behind me. I spun around. No one. The air was empty. I turned back to the mirror, heart pounding. For a split second, I thought I still saw a faint impression of a figure, right where no person stood. A trick of light, maybe? It looked like a man in an old-style white patient gown, face gaunt, eyes hollow. Then it was gone, and it was just me, wide-eyed and alone in an empty gym. I left my water bottle behind and backed out of the fitness centre, unwilling to stay another minute. Later, I recalled that one resident had jokingly speculated the ghosts might hang out in the gym. He suspected that room had been the old morgue. Staring into that mirror, I wondered if he was right. Perhaps I had seen one of those morgue residents still lingering near the spot where his body once lay. By this point, a month in, my nerves were getting frayed. I was no longer sleeping well. Every distant noise set me on edge. The building's silence was oppressive. Even the normal hum of city life seemed muffled inside those thick hospital walls. I needed to understand what was happening. Was it just me losing it? Or was there truly something supernatural? I started talking to neighbours, delicately bringing up the subject. To my surprise, a lot of them were eager to share once I opened the door. One neighbour on the 4th floor confided that he sometimes felt a cold presence in the sub-basement storage units. When I'm down there alone, I swear someone's right behind me, but when I turn, it's just shadows, he said, eyes wide. A young woman down the hall admitted she hasn't used the stairwell ever since one night the lights in it flipped off one by one as she walked, plunging her into darkness, just like I had seen through my peephole. Another time, she heard footsteps echoing around her in the stairwell when no one else was there. I felt like I was being followed, she whispered to me, and I ran out as fast as I could. Her story sounded exactly like what the doorman had told that superintendent in the news article I later found. He would go down alone and hear footsteps, felt a presence following him. I started digging into online forums and news about 123 on the park. What I found simultaneously validated my experiences and terrified me further. A New York Post article from 2015 described how, soon after the building opened as apartments in 2014, residents and staff began reporting bizarre phenomena, strange voices and mysterious footsteps attributed to the ghosts of former patients, according to one doorman. At least 3 doormen quit within months, refusing to work in a messed-up place they swore was haunted. I read one quote twice, heart-hammering. Every time he would go down there, the basement by himself, he would hear footsteps. He felt like a presence was following him. But this was printed in black and white, essentially exactly what I and my stairwell neighbour had felt. The building's own employees couldn't handle it. Management apparently had trouble renting apartments too, perhaps because of the whisper network about the hauntings. Another piece, in the New Yorker of all places, recounted how one resident's overhead kitchen lights would switch off by themselves while she was standing there. A doorman saw the stairwell lights turn on floor by floor on camera with no one there. I shuddered, thinking of my peephole sighting. A cab driver dropping off a tenant casually warned, "Be careful, it's full of skeletons." Full of skeletons. That line played in my mind. Did he mean literal skeletons in the ground or the ghosts? Either way, it unsettled me deeply. There was even an amateur ghost hunter who snuck in one rainy night, reportedly seeing a dimly lit crucifix through a window and declaring somebody definitely died here. No kidding, I thought. Reading all this gave me a mix of relief and dread. Relief that I wasn't alone or insane. Dread at the confirmation that my new home was haunted as hell. The stories also made the building's history even more vivid. One resident interviewed mentioned everyone wondered where the hospital morgue had been. Laundry room? Gym? No one knew for sure, but the thought that I might be exercising or folding clothes on top of where corpses once lay, it made my skin crawl. I realised that any place I stood in 123 on the park could have been a place of death or pain in the past. The fancy children's playroom on the ground floor? Maybe it was once a surgery theatre or a recovery room where someone's mother last saw them. My beautiful 7th floor apartment with park views, it could have been a tuberculosis ward. The windows opened to let in chilly fresh air as pale patients listened to their own raspy breaths. One night, fueled by morbid curiosity and insomnia, I went down to the lobby where they had a mini library and communal space. In a dusty cabinet, I found an old leather-bound ledger, likely intentionally left by the developers as a decorative nod to the past. It looked like a registry of some sort. Flipping it open, I realised it was a logbook from the hospital days. Names, dates, notes, perhaps admissions or discharges from the 1920s. The ink was faded and in elegant cursive. As I ran my finger down a page at random, one entry leapt out. November 2nd, 1918, John Doe, A12567, male approximately 30, brought in delirious, high fever, cyanotic, placed in Ward C, expired 4 hours later, body to morgue 2, expired. They didn't even always get names during the flu crisis, John Doe. Cyanotic, which I knew meant bluish due to lack of oxygen. 4 hours later, the entry was so matter-of-fact, yet it made me tremble. Morgue 2, implying multiple morgue areas. How many John and Jane Does had died anonymous deaths in these halls? And how much fear, pain and confusion were etched into the very brick and plaster of this building? I suddenly slammed the book shut. The silence of the lobby seemed to throb around me, and I had the distinct sense that unseen eyes were watching. I carefully returned the ledger to the cabinet and hurried back to the elevator. As the elevator doors closed, I felt a lurch, not just in my stomach, but in the mechanism. The lift shuddered, and instead of going up to 7, it went down. The LED display blinked oddly, and I realised I was being taken to the basement level, even though I hadn't pressed the button for it. My finger stabbed the door open button, but nothing happened. With a soft ding, the doors slid open to basement B. I peered out into the semi-lit basement corridor. This was a level below the lobby, where storage rooms and maintenance offices were. I had no reason to be here at 2 a.m, yet the elevator had delivered me like a package to the underworld. I felt a cold sweat break out. For a long moment, I stayed in the elevator, 1 foot in, 1 foot out, indecisive. That was when I heard it. A faint metallic scraping, like a door with rusty hinges slowly opening somewhere out of sight. In my frazzled state, curiosity weirdly overrode fear. Maybe I'm meant to see something, I thought. Maybe the building, or whatever haunts it, is trying to show me. I stepped out of the elevator into the basement. The air was cooler down here with a chemical staleness. The elevator behind me promptly closed and, to my dismay, whisked itself back up, leaving me alone as the lights overhead dimmed to their motion sensor energy savers. I took a few steps forward, activating the nearest light. I was in a hallway that I knew led to storage lockers for residents. At the far end was a heavy door marked "Maintenance, Staff Only." And sure enough, one of those heavy double doors was slightly ajar, an inch-wide gap giving a peak of darkness beyond. Perhaps the source of the scraping sound? I swallowed hard. "This is stupid," an inner voice screamed. "Go back upstairs!" But another voice, quieter but insistent, said, "I have to know. I have to know what's haunting my home if I ever want to live in peace." So, against all better judgment, I walked toward the ajar door. Each step, the concrete floor seemed to grab at the soles of my shoes with a sticky tack. The door had a wire-reinforced glass panel, but it was black on the other side. I gently pushed it open and squeezed through. Inside was a flight of stairs leading further down. A sub-basement? I had no idea there was another level below. Very few apartment dwellers knew about or accessed these parts. The developers had probably sealed most off. But here it was, open. A bare bulb at the top of the stairs gave off just enough glow for me to see the stairs ended at another corridor below. Taking a deep breath and flipping on my phone flashlight, I descended. Every creak of the old steps set my nerves jangling. At the bottom, I found myself in a narrow hallway with tile walls the colour of old bone. It definitely felt like I'd stepped back in time. This area hadn't been remodelled at all. My light caught faded arrows and numbers painted on the walls. One said Ward C and another Morgue, with an arrow pointing down the hall to my left. My heart nearly stopped at that. The morgue? I was actually here, in the old guts of the hospital where they used to keep the dead. The air was frigid and carried a faint, sweet odour that I recognised from my past life as a volunteer in a college anatomy lab, formaldehyde. They must have kept chemicals here, or maybe that smell just never goes away. I crept forward, one slow step at a time. My light played over doors with small glass portholes. Most were shut. The ones labelled as storage or electrical I ignored. But a door on the left, slightly ajar like the one upstairs, drew my attention. The peeling label on it read Morgue 2. I felt a jolt. The same Morgue 2 from that ledger entry of John Doe. The door was open just a crack, enough for me to see darkness inside. A rational person would turn back here. I wish I could tell you I ran. I didn't. I nudged the door open and stepped through. My phone light skimmed over the room and I felt my gorge rise. It was a fairly large chamber, and along one wall were what looked like refrigerated drawers, body lockers. Some of the stainless steel doors hung open, empty. Several old gurneys were pushed against the opposite wall, one tipped on its side. In the middle of the room stood an object covered by a mildewed canvas sheet. The smell was stronger here, decades of chemicals and rot. I stepped in, letting the door drift shut behind me. The beam of light trembled in my hand as I played it over the drawers. Someone had spray-painted a large X on the wall above them, perhaps a sign by the demolition crew that never got to finish this room. I took another step, and my shoe splashed in something. Startled, I looked down. I had stepped in a puddle of water. At least I hoped it was just water. A pipe must have been leaking, leaving slicks on the tile floor. I carefully skirted around the puddle toward the centre object under the sheet. Something in me needed to see it. With my free hand, I lifted the heavy canvas. Underneath was an autopsy table, antique and porcelain, a dull off-white shine with a drain at one end and rusted metal buckets beneath. My stomach lurched at the thought of what fluids those buckets once caught. Suddenly, I felt very exposed and foolish being in this room. All it would take was that door closing firmly, and I might be stuck. I decided I had seen enough. This place all but screamed with the energy of the dead. It was no wonder spirits roamed above. So much death started its journey right here in this cold room. As I turned to leave, I heard the softest creak behind me. The door, was it moving? I shone my light onto it. To my horror, I saw the door slowly swinging closed. I lunged, but it was too late. With a heavy click, it shut. I rushed to it and grabbed the handle, twisting and pulling. It was locked. There was no knob on this side, only a keyhole and a flat plate. I banged on it, panic rising. "Hello? Anyone there? I'm in here. Help!" That's when I heard it, on the other side of the door, a soft shuffling of feet. Relief flooded me. Someone had followed me, maybe security or a neighbour. "Please, I'm stuck. Open the door," I yelled. The light under the doorway was suddenly blocked by shadows, as if several people were standing just outside. Several? My mouth went dry. Had I been followed by staff? Or? No human voices answered me. Instead, a familiar sound drifted through the heavy door. Tap, 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 a knocking like I'd heard that first night at my apartment. Slowly, mechanically, 3 taps. I backed away from the door, pressing a hand over my mouth. The metal of the autopsy table pressed against my back. My flashlight began to flicker. The battery was dying after so much use. I smacked it with my palm and it glowed strong again for the moment. I mustered courage and spoke, my voice wavering. Who's there?" I half expected an answer, but none came in words. Instead, from somewhere deep in the unlit corners of the morgue, I heard a rustling. My flashlight beam swung toward the sound. In the corner, an object on one of the toppled gurneys moved. I stepped closer, squinting. It was a sheet, just like the canvas I'd lifted, but thinner. A stained white cotton sheet covering a human-shaped lump on the gurney. That lump, it hadn't been there moments ago, had it? My pulse skyrocketed. The sheet-covered form sat up. I stumbled back, a scream lodged in my throat. The sheet fell away, and what sat up on the gurney was the impossible silhouette of a person. Faceless in the darkness, but unmistakably there. I could make out the curve of shoulders, the tilt of a head. Then it swiveled off the gurney, standing upright. I say standing, but its feet made no sound on the wet floor. In fact, I realised with dawning horror that it had no feet visible beneath the hem of the sheet. It floated just an inch off the ground. Mind screamed to get out, but there was nowhere to go. The only door was blocked by whatever waited outside, and here in the room with me was this apparition rising. The figure in the sheet began to shuffle toward me. The sheet still obscured it entirely, like a lazy morgue attendant had tossed it over a corpse and left. My rational brain was shutting down. I pressed myself against the wall, eyes wide, shining my failing light at it. "Please," I whimpered. I wasn't even sure what I was pleading for. Mercy? Sanity? The figure halted a few feet in front of me. A corner of the sheet was tucked in such a way that it suggested a head shape underneath. Then slowly the head under the sheet tilted, as if regarding me inquisitively. A gurgling sound came from it, a wet, choking gurgle. My knees nearly gave out as I realised it sounded like someone trying to breathe through fluid. Sudden flashbacks from reading about the flu pandemic hit me. The description of patients drowning in their own lungs, nurses identifying the dying by their blue faces and blackened feet. Was this one of them? Still desperate for air, a century later? Tears pricked my eyes. This is not happening. The figure leaned closer. I could smell it now. A smell of earth and dried rot, like a long-buried thing unearthed. It raised an arm under the sheet, reaching toward me. I pressed back against the wall so hard I expected to sink into it. Just as the dripping end of the sheet that covered its hand almost grazed my shoulder, a new sound cut through the thick air. A clattering bang from the hall, followed by a man's voice yelling, "Hey! Anyone down here?" In an instant, the sheeted figure collapsed to the floor, as if whatever had animated it simply let go. The sheet lay in a heap on the wet tiles, empty. The lights in the morgue, which I hadn't even realised were present, flickered on in tandem, buzzing to life with weak amber glow. I was left standing there, shaking violently, staring at a crumpled, stained bedsheet on the floor. There was no body under it. It was as if the ghost had gone as quickly as it came. The door to the morgue suddenly burst open, and I screamed before I registered that it was the building superintendent, flashlight in hand, with the doorman peering worriedly over his shoulder. "Sarah? What the hell?" the super exclaimed. Later I'd find out they'd seen the elevator behaving oddly on the lobby panel and came to investigate, finding the maintenance door ajar. They found me pale, soaked in cold sweat, and babbling about ghosts. I must have sounded insane. I remember the doorman gently putting his hand on my shoulder as they guided me out of that room. Under the bright beam of the super's flashlight, I caught one last glimpse of the inside of Morgue 2. Everything was just as it had been, except the sheet that had been on the floor was now neatly folded atop the autopsy table. I bit my tongue. Did they see that? I wasn't sure, and I didn't ask. They half dragged me up the stairs. As we exited the maintenance door back into the resident storage basement, I felt a cool breeze and glanced back one more time. Down at the end of the sub-basement hall, by the elevator I initially came from, stood a figure. The same nurse in the white uniform I'd seen earlier pushing the gurney. She was far away, but I could clearly discern the old-fashioned cap on her head and the outline of her 1920s-style nursing dress. She wasn't threatening now, she simply stood watching, as if to be sure I left. Our eyes met across the distance, or I think they did. Her face was a blur, and I felt an odd wave of emotion that wasn't mine, a deep, sorrowful remorse. Then the super slammed the maintenance door behind us and the figure was gone. I wish I could say that was the end of it. I moved out immediately, broke my lease, forfeited my deposit, everything. Management didn't even protest. Perhaps they had heard it all before. I packed my things and was gone from 123 on the park within 48 hours of that basement night. But the experience, as strange as it sounds, hasn't fully left me. In the weeks after, I had persistent nightmares. I'd bolt awake convinced I heard that tap, tap, tap on my new bedroom door, or the squeak of a phantom gurney down the hall. In my dreams, I often see that nurse. I've come to think of her as Nurse Holloway. I don't know why that name, perhaps my mind gave it to her. In one recurring nightmare, I am Nurse Holloway. I'm standing on the roof of the hostel in 1918, the sky orange with a setting sun. Around me are rows of beds with skeletal patients coughing. A phonograph somewhere plays a warbly tune. I taste metal in my mouth, maybe her grief or dread. I look down over the ledge in the dream and see the street below filled with hearses, a line of them idling, waiting for bodies. When I wake from that, I often feel an overwhelming urge to throw open a window for air, as if I'd been smothering. I've tried to tell myself these are just the traumas of living in a scary place for a short time, but some things defy easy explanation. For instance, as I was unpacking in my new apartment across town, I found something among my belongings that definitely wasn't mine, an old, brittle hospital wristband with the name Margaret H. and a date, Oct. 15, 1918, printed on it. It was coiled at the bottom of a box that had been sealed since I left 123 on the park. Holding that band, I felt faint. Was it a souvenir from my ghostly friends? A coincidence from a thrifted piece of furniture? I don't know. I've kept it in a Ziploc bag tucked in a drawer, too intrigued and scared to throw it away. I shared my story anonymously online, and it turns out many former residents of 123 on the park have eerily similar tales. Unseen children crying, mysterious shadows, electronics going haywire, and a heavy sense of being watched or even occasionally touched by invisible hands. One former doorman even described the basement's sublevels in detail, confirming the existence of those morgue rooms and adding that sometimes the motion sensors down there would trigger alarms with no living person present. People in the neighbourhood joke that the building is haunted by anti-gentrification ghosts, spirits angry that a place of healing for the poor became luxury housing for the wealthy. I'm not sure the ghosts care about gentrification, but I do believe they remain because of unfinished business or trauma. They died in a time of crisis, perhaps confused, in pain, or not ready to go. And now they're trapped, replaying their final moments, bound to the place they last knew. Sometimes I wonder, What did Nurse Hollow, if she was indeed a real nurse, want from me? That look across the hallway felt like a plea. Maybe she wasn't trying to harm me with the gurney. Maybe she was performing her endless duty, ferrying another body to the morgue, and mistook me for an intruder or even a patient. The sheeted ghost, was it John Doe who died searching for air? I'll never know for sure, but I have theories that bring me a bittersweet comfort. In one, I imagine that by discovering them, by witnessing their presence, I somehow acknowledged their pain. Perhaps Nurse Holloway and John Doe just wanted the living to remember them, to not simply gloss over the horrors that happened in that building for the sake of fancy condos and high rents. A part of me felt guilty leaving. It was as if I'd slammed the door on hundreds of lingering souls, abandoning them to their endless night. But I couldn't stay. My own sanity was at stake. I did, however, leave something behind. On my last day, in the early dawn when the lobby was empty, I slipped that page from the 1918 ledger, the one about John Doe, into a frame and set it on a side table in the lobby with a small note. In memory of those who suffered here, we haven't forgotten you. It was my small attempt to honour them. Whether the building's management kept it or tossed it, I don't know, but I hope in some way the spirits felt the gesture. It's been a year now. I deliberately avoid Parkside Avenue. I haven't so much as walked on the same side of the street as 123 on the park since I left. Yet despite that, 123 has not entirely let me go. Just last week, I was up late dozing off on my couch when I heard a familiar sound in my quiet apartment. A soft knock, knock, knock on my wall in a perfect slow trio. I straightened up, heart in my throat, and for a wild moment I considered responding with, "Who's there?" But I was too afraid of the answer. Instead, I whispered, "I remember you." The knocking ceased as if acknowledged. Some nights I dream of that building not as the terror I experienced, but almost as a sympathetic character. A grand old hospital, trying to rest but unable to because of the weight of what lies within. The dreams that scare me most aren't the ones with ghosts, but the ones where I'm back in my empty apartment at 23 on the park. And everything is quiet. Too quiet. I wake up panicked that I'm trapped there again, in that silence, filled with unseen eyes. If you ever find yourself near Prospect Park in Brooklyn, and you happen to stroll by the stately building at 123 on the park, take a moment to look up at its many windows. In the daylight, it looks like any other high-end apartment complex, but as someone who lived through there, I can tell you it's anything but ordinary. Behind those windows, late at night, the past and present whisper to each other. Sometimes lights flicker with no explanation, as if those who belong to the past are sending signals. We are still here. I've come to accept that I'll always carry a piece of 123 on the park with me. I may have escaped its halls, but the strange, dark history of that building is part of my story now. Every so often, when I catch the scent of hospital disinfectant or hear an old elevator chime, I'm thrown back to that time, the terror, the sorrow, and oddly, the compassion I felt for those ghosts. I tell myself I won't go back there, not even as a guest, but if I ever did, it would be with a bunch of flowers and a prayer. Flowers for the dead who linger, and a prayer that one day they find peace and finally leave 123 on the park, letting it become just another building with memories, not haunts, in its halls. Until then, if you're ever looking for a new apartment in Brooklyn and your budget is high, you might come across a listing for a beautiful unit at 123 Parkside Avenue. The ad will boast about the park views and modern amenities. What it won't mention is the faint crying you might hear at night, or the way your lights sometimes flicker when you're alone, or the cold spot by the closet that never goes away. It won't mention the reason a lease there might be unexpectedly easy to get, and it certainly won't mention the shadows in the basement. But take it from me, some deals are too good to be true. This one might cost you more than you're willing to pay. After all, how do you put a price on your peace of mind or your soul? In the end, I survived my time at 123 on the park. But I left a part of myself behind in those endless corridors, just as I took a part of its darkness with me. And whenever I pass by old hospitals or hear a gurney wheel in a movie, a chill runs through me. I think of Nurse Holloway and John Doe and all the rest. I hope they find their light. I hope they eventually realise the war is over, the virus is gone, the pain has ended. Until then, their home is that building. And if you're ever brave or foolish enough to live there, remember, listen carefully to the small things. A whisper in the hallway, a knock in the night, a flicker in the dark. It might just be a greeting from those who came before you. In 123 on the Park, the past is never dead, it's not even past. Stay safe out there and always pay attention to the strange, dark and mysterious, especially when they're right in your own home.
Every story has an end, but here the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week, so if you crave suspense, the unexplained and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.